Hello, everybody, and welcome to our latest webinar. Today I'm joined by Clint Sprauve and Malcolm Isaacs from HP Enterprise, and they will be talking to you today about the evolution of test automation for DevOps. And if you have any questions for either Clint or Malcolm about the content of today's webinar, just type your questions into the questions field on your control panel, and then at the end of the webinar, we will go through them one by one. So let me now hand you over to today's presenters. Now, over to you guys. And they're just getting their screen up and running.
Thank you very much, Dara. Okay. I'm Malcolm, and I'm a researcher in the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Digital Research team. We're part of the Application Delivery Management Group. My colleague Clint Sprauve is the Senior Product Marketing Manager for the functional testing products. So we're going to be talking about the evolution of test automation for DevOps. I'll be speaking about some of the drivers for test automation in DevOps, and then I'm going to hand over to Clint, who will look at some of the more practical aspects. So I don't want to get into a deep definition of what DevOps means, as I imagine that most of the people on the session today have got a pretty good idea of what DevOps is. There's an occasional difference of opinion as to what the essence of DevOps is, but every description of DevOps really includes automation as a key concept. There's the book Continuous Delivery by Jez Humble and David Farley, where they really call this out. They say that automation is the key. And I actually did a little check, and I found that the word automation or some variant of it appears around 1.5 times per page in the book. So it's pretty fair to say DevOps is really infused with the concept of automation. So many testers are still getting into DevOps and getting their heads around the concepts, and they're trying to understand their role in the new organization that's been set up as a result of the move to DevOps. So DevOps really affords a lot of potential for testers to influence the organization and really change the way that the organization works. And because automation is so fundamental, testers and automation engineers really are essential to the success of the DevOps implementation. In practice, quality professionals are bringing their existing skills to the DevOps organization, but they also need to adjust to a new culture and a number of new processes that DevOps requires. Within HP or Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, we actually have a lot of DevOps projects, and we're going to share some of the ways that are expanding DevOps organization. So I'll talk a little bit about the why, and then I'm going to hand over to Clint, who will talk a bit more about how. So why is DevOps so important to quality professionals, and why is it? Well, automated functional testing has really been evolving for years, and I don't want to go through the whole history. I want to start at where we are today. So what we're looking at here are some details from the World Quality Report. It was recently released by HP, Capgemini, and Sogeti. We've been doing it for the past few years. We've been asking large organizations about their testing practices. There's, I think, around 1,500 organizations that have been queried for the survey, and some of the results that we're seeing today is that 93% of these organizations are using some form of Agile as part of their software development. There are more and more organizations that are adopting open source and doing continuous integration. And they're estimating $60 billion in total of savings by using open source. And we're also seeing a big shift in terms of user experience, which has really become a central part of what we're looking at in today's applications and what we want to deliver to our customers. It's not just a product; it's a good user experience. More than half of the population is estimated to be connected by 2019. You've got 30 billion Internet of Things devices that are going to be connected by 2020, and these devices they're going to have to work seamlessly. They're going to be communicating with applications themselves that need to scale, and they need to be able to cope with the quantity and the frequency of data. We're bringing functional testing towards the user experience, as well as just making sure that the application works as it's expected to. So let's have a look at a real life scenario. It's a practical example that we took from a shopping application. So there's a number of things that you can do. For example, in the flow that you can see here, you've got the user logging in. They're added to a cart. They're going to be checking it out, and they're going to be arranging shipping to deliver it. And at every step, there's a lot of considerations to take into account. So first of all, how's the application itself going to be used? When does the user log in? Are they going to be browsing around the store first and then logging in so that they can make their purchase? Or are they going to log in first and then browse so that they can, their history can follow them around? What kind of device is the customer going to be using? Is it going to be a mobile device? Is it going to be maybe a desktop web browser? Maybe they're going to start the session on their smartphone and then migrate the same session to the desktop, because at this point of the process, it's more convenient to see more information on a larger screen. Can we do a seamless transfer from one device to the other? Whereabouts are the users located? What are the network characteristics that they're experiencing? Because as you may know, the geography and the network profile can impact on the application itself, and the way that the application responds in terms of performance, etc. When it's time to make the purchase, the application might be dependent on third-party services. You'll have payment services like Visa or MasterCard. You've got your shipping service that's going to be selected for delivery. And then once the order is placed, the customer can then move on to other things. They might carry on shopping for more things, but they might have left the application completely. But once they've left the application itself is still working, and it's still processing notifications, and it's sending notifications out to the customer. Some of these notifications might actually require some kind of user intervention. I mean, what happens if for some reason the item can't ship, or it's out of stock? Does the customer want to wait? Does the customer want to cancel the order, etc.? So really we're scratching the surface with the diagram here. So it's quite a simple, naive flow, but what you can see is that it's got a lot of moving parts, and each of those moving parts has got multiple points of failure, and they all need to be tested.
Sorry,
Not
Malcolm.
just,
Sorry to jump in right there.
Yeah.
It could just be an issue my end. All I'm seeing is a dark screen there. Just want to double check with you that you have your screen sharing option open.
I do. I'm seeing it says showing screen. I will pause and then.
Okay, I apologize because
do it.
So people coming in here saying they can see, but it might just be me. But I'll let you continue on. I just wanted to double check I wasn't alone on this. Okay.
Okay,
And the vast
no
majority
problem.
of people who come.
You've got a copy of the slides, so you can follow on.
I do indeed. I do. I apologize for the interruption, everybody. Just want to make sure that
Okay.
you can all see everything. Back to you guys.
Okay, so no problem. I'll carry on. Whoops. So one of the shifts that we're seeing was called out in the World Quality Report that I mentioned previously. It's not just about finding defects anymore. It's about protecting the company image. In a DevOps organization, the testers they're no longer the sole gatekeepers for quality. They're not just working with the developers, they're part of a team, and that team includes operations staff as well as testers and developers. So the move to DevOps involves a culture shift and a process shift, as you can see in the triangle here, and it's also supported by new technologies that are emerging to support the DevOps endeavor. But what really stands out is that quality is really important. And I've seen this myth, I've heard of this myth that quality goes away with DevOps, and to be honest, I don't really get where it comes from and what it means, because quality isn't going away at all. Rather than being confined to one specific part of the process, quality is central to the whole DevOps process. And the emphasis on quality is really sustained throughout the whole pipeline in DevOps. Developers are testing their software as they write it. They're writing unit tests. The testers are developing their own tests on top of that. As a change moves down the pipeline towards production, it's being tested automatically at every stage of the way in a DevOps organization. And the nature of changes, the small changes that you should really be trying to achieve in a DevOps pipeline, they mean that you can small change fairly extensively in a short period of time. So quality really needs to increase. I mean, we're increasing rather than going away. And some people might have noticed the Renaissance images throughout the presentation. That really came about because one of the things Clint and I were talking about was a renaissance of quality, and particularly automated quality, throughout the whole of the process. But really, I want to look at what this means in practice. What is this about? So it starts with a culture shift. The testers are part of the team which is working differently than the way they used to work in the past. There's an emphasis on quality throughout the pipeline rather than having a checkpoint on the way to release. And in order to get really good and effective and timely feedback, we're constantly running tests to make sure that we can catch defects as soon as they enter the code base. Even trying to catch them before they enter the code base. And the quicker that we can get that feedback, that visibility to the team, the earlier we're able to resolve them. So the most challenging part really is the culture change. Teams aren't competing with each other anymore. You don't have a development team and a quality team, or a testing team and an ops team. Those people who used to maybe compete with each other in the past they're finding themselves in the same team. They've got the same goals. At least they should have this. I really like this quote from Henry Ford, that coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress, but working together is really what success is. And DevOps is a journey. Part of that journey is about trust, learning to trust each other, to collectively look for solutions to problems, rather than to assign blame. And leadership also plays a major part in this culture shift. There's got to be goals for developers and goals for testers and goals for the ops people on the same team. But the goals really need to be aligned with the team's common goals. And key to that is improving the customer experience. When there's a failure, the leadership must be supportive of learning from that failure and moving away from pointing fingers and assigning blame. The idea is to learn and to apply the lessons learned moving forward, and turn the failure into something positive. And quality really is not a feature. In DevOps, the software changes are always supposed to be moving towards production, and you need to make sure that when you get to production, the change in the software is at the level of quality that you expect from production software. So quality needs to be a baked-in part of the DevOps pipeline and not just part of a feature. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, the cultural shift that we need to make moves us towards a collective responsibility for quality. So it happens earlier in the process. The developers and the testers are working together on the quality of the software, and the testers are becoming more and more familiar with development environments so that they themselves can write automated tests of the different layers and the different components of the software, and not just wait until everything's integrated together and test end to end. Developers also need to think about, they have a responsibility as well to think about how to design their code, and that when a problem is found, they have to make sure that there's enough information in the log files so that we can understand what the problem is and fix it quickly without having to add all sorts of debugging logic and recompile things and reinstall things just to try and get to the bottom of the problem. So once code is checked in, automated tests need to start running, and this will happen many times a day. We need the tests to run quickly, not just to run frequently, but also to run quickly and to provide the pass and fail status very quickly. If quality is part of the culture, and you've been shifting towards doing everything earlier, then you're going to be testing constantly anyway. But it's not just testing of functional requirements. There are other non-functional requirements as well. There's performance, for example, and security. And you might also have compliance requirements that you'll need to test throughout the pipeline. You don't want to leave these things as an afterthought. People who are experiencing a poorly performing mobile application, for example, they're not going to use the app again. And if security is a problem, the consequences could be catastrophic. You might find that people aren't going to have anything to do with your company anymore if you've got a large security breach. And there's been enough high-profile security breaches recently. I don't really think I need to call any of them out explicitly. So keep in mind that that's something that needs to be taken into consideration throughout the DevOps pipeline. So the next thing is we need to relentlessly automate the pipeline. So if you want to be fast, you've got to automate. You can't really do this manually. There might be some room for manual testing. If automation of some tests aren't going to give you a good return on investment, then by all means do manual testing. But it should really only be a very small part of the overall testing effort, because the more automated that your tests are, the quicker they're going to run, and the more you can run. And it's not just the tests themselves that you need to be automating. You need to be able to just push a button, and the testing environment and the test data is going to be automatically deployed and made available, and the software itself is going to be automatically installed and configured on the system that you're going to test. There's also virtualization. Virtualize the services that you're using in order to reduce dependencies on outside or external code that isn't under your control. And you'll also probably want to virtualize network conditions, particularly in mobile applications, so that you can simulate a wide variety of real-life scenarios without having to physically move your devices to a geography that happens to have those conditions at that point in time. So we touched on the need for good communication, but it's not just communication between individuals. You need to share your insights with the rest of the team. Alert the team to issues as soon as they come up, whether that's a production issue or whether it's a broken build or whether it's a defect that happens to be found as part of the continuous testing that you're doing. Let everyone see what's going on. That lets them plan, it lets them come up with solutions very quickly. If you're using a framework with a dashboard to provide that kind of visibility to all of your stakeholders, you're ensuring that everyone's got access and is working off the same data, and that minimizes the chances for misunderstandings and finger pointings. So if we put everything together, it will look something like this. With DevOps bringing together the application delivery and the IT operations groups, they come together, they have a shared methodology for dev and ops throughout the development pipeline. And you can see the diagram, Automate looks as though it's front and center, but really it's central to the whole pipeline, and along with the orchestration and transformation, it's running all the way through that development theory. At this point to Clint, to some more practical examples of DevOps in a large organization. So just bear with me for a second. I will transfer control over to Clint. And Clint, you should be receiving me now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Malcolm. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Clint Sprauve, and what I want to do is really continue what Malcolm was discussing and give you some real-world case studies in terms of what we have done at HP Software. So as you know, even companies that develop, we all have to go through, large companies, large and small, we have to go through our well. So I wanted to give you some experiences that we've had here within our R&D organization and some of the successes that we've had in terms of transitions from a traditional software development over the years to more of a DevOps-centered software. And of course, this has come from the demands of our customers. So I just want to give you a little background so you can kind of see how the challenges that we've had and how we've been able to overcome some of those, and how you could probably take this back to your organization as well. So as we go back to examine the points that Malcolm discussed earlier, when you talked about point number one, where it starts with a culture change, and that was exactly what we had to do. So quality within DevOps. We had to actually change our culture and our thought process. I've been privileged for the past 4 years to work with some brilliant developers in Israel with our software products team, and these guys are extremely sharp, very excellent product managers. And the best thing about them is their ability based upon the market needs, and they're really good about that. So one of the things that we had to work on, because when you do a DevOps transformation, it's not just about development and operations from a software side. You have to look at holistically. So you have to look at other areas such as marketing, such as how you're able to release, earnings, things of that nature. So you really have to take a broader picture in terms of how you do that. So with a large company like HP, one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we changed was productivity. So we looked at our development environment. It was based upon a shared infrastructure. And with that, it was, fairly, with that, it's fairly unstable. And, it can be easily damaged. So what we want to do is figure out a way that we could be more efficient and be more productive with our DevOps journey. We also had the issue of working from anywhere. Latency was killing some of the connections for some of the dev teams because we have a very distributed dev team. So we had to look at and examine some of these things first off. And as Malcolm talked about, you have to get buy-in from senior management at the senior VP level in order to be able to implement a successful DevOps transformation. So productivity was the first challenge. So we had to look at not only our internal tools, but we had to look at external tools as well. So as you know, open source plays a huge role in DevOps development, in DevOps in general. So if you can see with this particular slide, you can see a lot of the tools, commercial and open source, up at the top. And then below, of course, you see our products. So what we had to do from an R&D perspective is really challenge ourselves and say, how do we blend or get an understanding of how we can really accelerate our productivity by using some of the more popular open source solutions that are out there, and how can we use that to help improve the software that we're developing that's going to help accelerate DevOps as well. So we were able to take that challenge and be able to integrate quality throughout, not only with our solutions, as you see below in green, but with the in gray. So by doing this, we're able to increase the quality of the products that we develop that's going to help increase velocity for your DevOps journey. So I'm going to give you one example of one of the teams that we had for one of our cloud solutions for performance testing. So this team, one of the things they had to do was evolve the team structure. So as Malcolm talked about earlier about some of the current challenges of DevOps. So you have to really examine the complexity of the applications and projects that you have on your test and really figure out how you're going to organize it. So in this particular example, one of the teams created specifically a dev test team. Now this dev test team is extremely technical. And with that technical, and being technical, I'm sorry, can we place someone on mute? I'm hearing some background noise, please. So we'll pause for a brief moment until we can get the background noises muted. Excellent, thank you. So the dev test organization that was created is a very technical team. And these are primarily, they're really developers that have a significant role in testing. So what you're seeing is when we start talking about the traditional skill sets of those that did test automation, typically these were the people that understood tools like QTP and UFT and other commercial tools. So this was a team that primarily understood mostly development languages like Java, C#, JavaScript, and so forth. So they were highly technical. And for this very complex application, we needed a team that was very technical. So just to show you the dev test organization, their goals were very different than traditional test automation teams. So their goal was automation from day one. As Malcolm talked about, automate relentlessly. We need to automate early. So that was one of their goals. Manual testing was still essential to this group. So even though they did a lot of automation, they automated a majority of their tests, they still had manual testing ingrained in their testing process because this is still needed. We talked about user experience as well. That's very important when you're looking at this DevOps journey. And then, of course, no more deliveries to QA. These guys were embedded in the DevOps process as a separate dev test organization. So they were critical to the quality of an application. But one thing that they also have done was, and what you'll see is as we start talking about, okay, where do traditional QA organizations go? Well, in this particular example, this group had additional responsibility. For example, they would actually handle some of those support tickets. They would go through our support system and go directly to R&D. So instead of waiting for that developer to address some of these issues, they could actually address the issues and help close those tickets a lot faster. They get on forums and social networks to help answer questions for the user community. And they help create the build continuous integration and continuous delivery infrastructure. And one of the key areas is that what they've been helping to facilitate this throughout R&D is they train internal teams on DevOps best practices. What's worked for them, what hasn't worked, what tool sets have they used, have they switched in and out, and how they've been able to work that. So one of the things that I really think that's very important when you're looking at DevOps for your organization, You can't really implement a cookie cutter approach to DevOps and quality because the way this team is organized, again, is very technical, very developed. Some organizations that works extremely well depending on the application and the project. But in other organizations, you still have separate or siloed teams. You may have large separate QA organizations. You may have teams that are based on compliance. And of course, your team may be comprised of a lot of subject matter experts and business analysts. So what you have to do is figure out ways to incorporate their skill set, but also be able to figure out ways to make sure that you can automate correctly where you have reusable tests and be able to have DevOps and quality throughout the life cycle. Another example is a product that we have called Service Anywhere. And this is just a quick example of just how they've implemented DevOps when they went from version 3.3 to 3.4. And their particular journey was very interesting. So as you can see from these slides, you can see the increase in the amount of productivity and the amount of automated testing that they were able to do, and also the amount of coverage, which also increased the quality of this application. So if we look at two different types of applications and two different types of platforms, you can see how they were able to evolve and then basically increase the amount of tests that they ran each day. So for each test run, on each push, they had 13,000 automated functional tests run daily. So which means they've got this continuous integration, continuous development process down pat. So again, we talked about Relentlessly Automate. So with that, we want to make sure that there's end-to-end automation flow for continuous testing. They use Jenkins, and Jenkins is used throughout our organization as well. So Jenkins acts as that orchestrator. And then we want to make sure that it's very flexible and customizable to accommodate specific customer flows. So, and we used Codar to help basically create those environments. So if you think about a company as HP, like HP, and the different types of software that we sell and the different configurations that we have and the different service packs on the Windows platform and others that we need to make sure that we account for, Codar allows us to build those specific environments with those specific patch levels and product levels so that we can execute those tests and be able to do that without having to, but we're also incorporating virtualization in all of this as well. So that way we can make sure that we're getting did in previous years. So the example that I talked about, and one of the things that I like about this particular slide, if you look at this slide, if you look down at the bottom, one of the things that you don't see here, which is kind of the irony of the entire presentation or this particular slide in general, is that you don't see the HP software products listed at the bottom for this. So when we started talking about test automation coverage, the particular dev test team that we worked with, they were given the freedom to choose what tools they needed in order to implement their job. So they used actually a combination of mostly open source solutions to start off on their journey, but also incorporated a lot of the HP tools at certain times. So again, they were given the flexibility of what's going to work best. How are we going to really accelerate our test automation journey? So it's given them the opportunity to use to increase their coverage. So if we look at the coverage and the test type, so for the client or the UI coverage, they only did 60%. So with DevOps, you're seeing more on back-end and API and web services level testing, less on the front end. So if you think about the tools that we've sold in the past where the focus, or in the past in terms of how they were presented, it was focused on the UI. How much of the UI can we automate? Whereas with DevOps and even with Agile development, you're taking a slightly different approach. The client's automated. 80% of the back end, or some of the database, the API calls, were automated. And then for the performance testing, all the protocols and the regions were automated. The goal was to make sure that we shift our thinking in terms of how we do automation and the amount of coverage, and what is going to make sure that we create a superior quality product each and every time. And so that we use for different things, for AngularJS type applications. We use Mocha, and then testing on different cloud platforms such as Amazon and the Microsoft Azure cloud. So one of the things that you also want to do is we talked about as well, create visibility. You want to be able to predict if a code commit will break a build. So you want to make sure you have these quality gates and be able to learn from that. So you want these predictive analytics so you can understand exactly what's happening. You know, what happens when developer A breaks a particular build. We want to make sure we have those quality gates, and so that's not checked in again. How do we work with him so we can ensure that that type doesn't happen again? And if there's something that he's doing, how can we flag that that's happening earlier? So we want to predict and plan for defect introduction. So as you'll see as you begin your DevOps journey, one of the terms that you'll hear within that journey is going to be predictive analytics, and you're going to hear a lot of that. So the goal is to accurately predict and plan for defects introduction. We want to do that as early in the software development lifecycle as possible. And as we all know, and you've been hearing this for years, the earlier in the software development lifecycle that you find that defect, the less it's going to cost your organization. So what are some of the key lessons learned from our DevOps journey? Well, for us, you know, it was DevOps is definitely possible, and it's a huge potential for speed and quality. Now, again, if you think about large organizations that have, you know, 200,000 plus employees and a huge R&D labs and locations and developers dispersed throughout the globe, trying to seem like it's impossible. But we were able to really break down and understand, okay, what does that success look like for us? And then incorporate those cultural changes when you incorporate DevOps. I'm actually in the product marketing organization, but I go to Israel several times a year to learn from our R&D team, work with our senior product management to get a better understanding of when I go out, how does their release cycle, how does that affect how I present our product to customers, how does that affect our sales organization? So when you start incorporating these cultural changes, you have to realize that it doesn't just affect the quality teams, dev teams at the technical level, it affects how the business is run. So these that have to be incorporated for these cultural changes. DevOps definitely requires a lot of discipline because there are a lot of moving parts. Culture change, right? And change is hard for many organizations. And I'm lucky to work with an extremely set of smart developers and just in a smart group all around that they have that discipline to get this done. And automation and tools are important, but they're not everything. And that was one of the things that we really had to learn. Again, you're talking about an organization where we, you know, this is our DNA. We sell test automation tools from performance to security to functional testing. So we had to take a step back and say, okay, what's really important to help us succeed? And how can we learn and incorporate this into the software that we're developing? And then, of course, communication, collaboration, and trust. And whether you are centrally located or just dispersed throughout the globe, communication and collaboration is a must, and definitely trust is as well. So if you'd like more info on DevOps, we have a website. I'm sorry, I don't have the link to it on this slide, but there is a website we have called Tech Beacon. We have a lot of thought leaders like Malcolm, who has a lot of information on DevOps and DevOps journeys, not only just from HP, but from external companies as well, where they've shared their experiences on this particular site. So it's called techbeacon.com, and if you go there, you can grab a lot of great information. Also, you can try some of our existing products and even some free editions of our tools, like our network virtualization trials. So you can try that now as well. And a new product that we've introduced in July called Lean Functional Testing, or we call it Lean FT for short. And then, of course, the community editions of LoadRunner with network virtualization, which comes with 50 virtual users for free. So you're able to try that, not only simulate 50 users, but you can also simulate the network and network environments and network conditions. And then we have a freemium version of that. So feel free to check out those links, and that is all that we have. So I guess I'll pass it back to the moderator and we can open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, guys, for that. And before we go towards the questions, I'm just going to go through one or two slides. So let me open up my screen here again. We have a second webinar taking place this week, and that'll be on tomorrow with our keynote from Eurostar 2015, Paco Hope, and he'll be discussing Zen and the art of security testing. And you can register for that over on Test Huddle. The slider there will bring you into the landing page, but you can also find it on testhuddle.com/October Webinars 2015. As you are probably aware, the Eurostar conference is taking place next week, so we're really excited by that. And there's still time for you to register. Here's our group booking offer, where you can buy 4 tickets and get an extra ticket absolutely free. So you can check out all our pricing options over on the Eurostar website. And over there, you'll find out a bit more as well about our mobile conference called Mobile Deep Dive, which is taking place on the Friday after Eurostar ends. So we've got a great lineup for that there, and you can find out all the information, pricing, and everything you need to know about Mobile Deep Dive on the Eurostar website as well. So we'll just see if we've any questions come through here. I have a question here that says, after getting the 100% code coverage, do you still find it necessary to do manual testing for customer experience or issues that the automation may not be getting? And if you need me to repeat that question, I will.
No, that's okay. I definitely got it. Yes, manual testing is still extremely important. As I talked about before, when we start talking about the impact of not only just mobile devices and the always on, not just cell phones, but tablets and things of that nature, user experience becomes really huge with that. So when we start talking about manual testing, you want to be able to cover those areas that you won't necessarily get from automation. So as again, we talked about how a lot of the testing is done more on the back end, especially with DevOps and with Agile transformation, and there's less done on the UI. So those manual testers are so important. Another reason it's extremely important is because you have subject matter experts that know the business side. So from a design perspective, the developers will know, okay, this is what I need to develop, this is how it needs to code, this is how it should work properly, along with input from the business. But they also need to understand usability from the business side. Will this person actually do these particular items in this particular step? Are you giving them too many hurdles to jump through in terms of how they would execute the functionality? So just to answer your question, yes, manual testing is still extremely important. It doesn't go away. It's just that automation is really key to the success of DevOps because you need that speed and agility. And the more that you can get tested and covered, whether it's performance, security, and functional testing, you want to make sure that you also cover that user experience as well.
I have another question here which asks, how do you deal with flaky tests in a DevOps environment?
Flaky test. Good question. So I'll let Malcolm give his thoughts on that as well. I can tell you what I've experienced in the past. When you have those flaky tests, you have to really examine, one, what makes that test flaky? Is the test flaky because of how the test was designed, or is it flaky because of the application, right? So when we start talking about fragile tests, the ones that are very difficult for reuse or reusability. A lot of times, especially when testing was done on the front end, you'll find more of those flaky tests. Where are they problematic, and why is it problematic? Is it problematic because I don't have the proper insight into those particular controls? And just really trying to understand what is actually causing that, and really kind of even putting those to the side. And that's where we talked about in the last question, manual testing. So if you have some flaky tests that are slowing down your velocity and reducing your productivity, then you want to maybe switch that to manual until you can figure out what's causing that. Could it be test design, or is it actually something within the application itself that's causing that?
Okay, that same person who asked that question there just added a little bit more detail, and what they added there was they said, sorry, to be precise, flaky automation tests, for example, Selenium tests. So I don't know if that makes the question clear.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense, because and this goes across just all tools in general. A lot of times it can be because of, again, we talked about the implementation or the platform of that test, and or sometimes the test can be fragile just in terms of how you're able to maintain it. So what you'll have to do is, if there's something that's flaky, is Selenium is basically, especially if you're using WebDriver, it's nothing more than an SDK. So you can use other tools in your arsenal to help address some of that flakiness. So if you have a set of tests that just aren't consistently working with Selenium, you can still use Selenium for your other test automation, but you can also add other tools and add those SDKs to be able to handle. That's one of the things that we've done as well. So example, like we have LeanFT, which is basically not only a test tool, but an SDK as well, Selenium test and LeanFT test automation environment, and be able to do different things. So we have other tools out there, such as Water and Sahi and things of that nature that can really help address some of the shortcomings that you may get with various tools like Selenium in that instance.
The next question here asks, does DevOps need to have security testing together?
Does it need to have security testing together? Security testing should be incorporated into, to me, in the past, security testing used to be a nice to have, but it definitely should be incorporated into your testing as early as possible. At the code level, at the release level, production level, performance testing level, all different areas should incorporate security testing. So that's extremely important, especially nowadays.
Let me see if there's some more questions here. Another question here asks, how do we need to reduce the effort on automation script maintenance, assuming generic scripts will have its own challenges? You'd like me to repeat that for you there, Clint?
Yes. Yeah, repeat that one more time.
Sure. It says, how do we need to reduce effort on the automation script maintenance, assuming generic scripts will have its own challenges?
Reduce the maintenance. Yeah, part of that is it really comes into your test script design, right? Because if you think about it, you're writing code. So it really comes down to, how do I build my tests to ensure that they're robust, I can provide reuse, and I've developed them to where when my test, if I do run into an error in the application, how does it recover from that? Or if I have to make a significant change, what's the refactoring of those tests? How does that look? So what you want to do is, you can have a set of generic tests, but what you want to really do is understand, okay, what does my framework look like in terms of how I'm building that automation, just to ensure that what I'm building is robust and reusable. So that's going to reduce the amount of maintenance that you have, right? So that's really going to start with one, and this is one of the things that's very important, especially with DevOps, because you're working much more tightly with the development team. So you can understand, what does, even on the GUI level, what does that object recognition look like? What is my level of access to APIs to be able to test certain controls? How much unit testing are we doing? So the amount of maintenance is really going to depend on how, as long as the testing isn't done in silos with each developer, and you kind of have a game plan in terms of how quality throughout, you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, you want to be able to reduce the amount of maintenance by creating an environment that says, this is what our test process is going to be. This is how we're going to make sure that we can recognize each of these components and how we'll be able to test them. So it really comes down to test design that's going to reduce the amount of test maintenance that you have. And it's going to vary, of course, from organization to organization, depending on the complexity of the application of your test.
And do you recommend any open source security testing tools to implement?
Any open source? That I'm not necessarily sure of. I'm sure there are, but I'm not heavily versed on the open source security tools. I don't know if Malcolm, if you have any information on that or any input.
No, I'm not familiar with open source security testing tools. I mean, I do know that we in HP, we have our own set of security testing tools. You want to make sure that when you're using a security testing tool, you use that tool because you could be putting the future of your company in the hands of that tool. So if there are security tools out there that are open source, make sure that you do your due diligence first before you use them, before you trust your security to those tools. I don't know of any open source tools.
And they're asking, do you encourage the entire team to help with all the different levels of testing, or only the testers?
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization and the complexity of the application under test and the projects, and the organizational dynamics. Of course, you want everyone to be involved in quality, just throughout the organization, whether you're DevOps or even if you're traditional. You want to make sure that you involve as many stakeholders as possible to make sure that what you're releasing is exactly what the end user would want. So you want to make sure that you involve them in the right way. So, for example, we talked about automation versus manual. Well, my personal philosophy is that I don't believe that anyone that's not well versed in software development should be doing test automation, but they can contribute in other areas, as we talked about with the subject matter experts and the business analysts. They have a role because they know the business and they know the end user pretty much better than anyone else in the organization. So if you incorporate them the right way, I think that helps involve teams the best way within in terms of the quality of the application to be released. But if you involve them the wrong way, then I think that's going to slow your organization down.
Another question here asks, how is behavior-driven development incorporated into DevOps?
That's an excellent question. So behavior-driven development is really nothing more. It's really a subset of test-driven development, right? As we talked about shifting earlier in the software development lifecycle, and DevOps is really, from my perspective, nothing more than your Agile transformation version 2, right? So when we talked about Agile, it was more about stand-ups, Scrum teams, how you're organized. Whereas with DevOps, you're really getting more into the technical aspects of how you implement this. So behavior-driven development is really going to help develop those tests earlier. And this is a way that you can involve some of those test automation engineers as well. Now, some people try to use behavior-driven development because it uses that natural or that domain-specific language to involve less technical. But again, you have to look at what that level of technical expertise is for that tester, right? So I wouldn't necessarily take a business analyst and put them in front of something like Cucumber to implement behavior-driven development. I still think there's a lot of ways that that can be maintained and used, but still having somewhat of a different skill set to incorporate that. So behavior-driven development, since it starts with that testing very early in the life cycle where you're starting that automation from day one, and you're able to build the code behind that, it plays a very significant role. And what you're seeing, even though behavior-driven development has been around for several years now, you're starting to really see it pick up steam, especially now that teams are implementing DevOps in their organization. So again, it's really test-driven development. So I see behavior-driven development playing a significant role in DevOps in the quality, because you need that technical tester to really help implement that and kind of help lay out what those requirements are for those user stories.
And the next question I have here asks, was there a need for training or upskilling testers to have the relevant skills when migrating to the DevOps approach? For example, learning a new automation tool.
Yes and no. I think, and I'll let Malcolm chime in here as well. From what I have seen at various companies and internally, like traditional test automation engineers, maybe if you've used a commercial tool like UFT or QTP, and you've been building test automation frameworks, the transition to a more technical DevOps role is much easier because you've been writing code all along, right? You know, it may be in a specific language. You just may have to learn a different language. Maybe it's JavaScript or C# or Java. So from that transition, it's much easier. Now, if you've been like the recipient of a framework, now maybe you're a user that's been using something like BPT, and you've been on the execution side, making that transition to do more automation may be a little bit difficult. But so what we've seen is that there's some that are actually elevating their skills to say, okay, now I want to learn a true development language. I need to learn C#, I need to learn Java, and learn more of the development principles to be able to fit in DevOps organizations. But it's really going to depend on the wherewithal of the individuals to make that transition, and whether they want to make that transition to something that's a little bit more technical from a DevOps perspective. Malcolm, do you have any input on that?
Yeah, I agree with what you say, and I think let's also not forget the experience that people have accrued over the years, and they can certainly bring that to bear as they move into a more agile and a more DevOps organization, because they're going to be more familiar with some of the questions that you can ask. The what if, and what happens if I do this, and what if this bit is missing. There's a lot of these questions are now being asked more up front, and testers and operations people are being more involved at the design stage, and not just later on in the deployment pipeline. So there's certainly, alongside the transition towards more automation and learning more languages and more developer-like skills, they still have their skills that are absolutely essential to having that quality throughout the DevOps pipeline. And as we said before, there is still a need for manual testing in some circumstances, even though our goal, our utopian environment would be fully automated all the way from start to end. But there's still going to be a need to do manual testing, and if you can get an automation engineer to start his or her automation journey by automating some of the manual tests that they're doing very repetitively, that might be a good way to get into it and make that transition a bit smoother.
Okay, and I think we'll leave it at that. We've gone over the hour there, so I just want to thank our two presenters today, Clint Sprauve and Malcolm Isaac. It was a very entertaining and informative webinar, and I'd like to thank all of our attendees as well and your questions. You can view a recording of this webinar as well as the slides over on Test Huddle very shortly. And we hope you can come back tomorrow and join us for a webinar on security testing with Paco Hope. So until then, take care and thanks again.
Thank you.